Molweni, Sanibonani, Dumelang, and welcome to this installation of Property Market Moves. I am Kululwa Mutwa, your host, and in this podcast, we talk all things property. If you are a student that are studying towards a property qualification, you've just started out your journey in business or in corporate, or even if you are just interested in property as an investment class, this is the platform for you. And we cover, some business principles in our conversations because part of what we do in property is informing, how we navigate our space in the property sector as business owners. So today we are hosting Ms Ayanda Magqaza. Ayanda Magqaza is the chairperson of the Women's Forum of SAIBPP, one of the SAIBPP chapters, but she also is a businesswoman in her own right. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation as we look at property or business in property through the gender perspective, right? So, welcome.
Thank you, Kululwa. It's a pleasure and an exciting moment to be on the podcast with you today. As introduced, I am Ayanda Magqaza, the chairperson of the Women's Forum at SAIBPP, and I am also a development manager by profession. Thank you.
So, tell us about your journey. I mean, where did you start? And a little bit about, the person, Ayanda.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a pretty difficult one to unpack, but maybe just the synopsis of it. I am Ayanda Magqaza, and you can tell by the clicks that I am from the Eastern Cape. Born and raised in Mthatha. That is my home. Though, my further heritage, my ancestral home is Engwane. That's also in the Eastern Cape. So I've spent most of my childhood years there, most of my schooling years in Grahamstown, Victoria Primary and High School. Then I left for university and I started at WITS. I studied a BSc in property studies. Yes, back then. Then in terms of employment, I worked briefly for a project management consultancy, Perm and project managers. But the bulk of my time in corporate was spent with Basil Reed at Basil Reed Developments. So that is where I would say I, kind of got more of the corporate experience in development management. And soon after, I went to pursue my postgraduate. So I studied a master's in finance, development finance. And from there, I briefly joined my parents' business before I started my own business.
Okay.
So today, I run a company, Tasksmiths, and we offer consulting services in development management, project management, and quantity surveying.
All right.
Yeah, so that's the journey. The person, well, I would just maybe connect my personality to also my participation here at SAIBPP, in that I am very interested in the conversation of transformation, conversation of gender inclusion, and just broadly, the subject of diversity in our country.
Okay. Yeah. And perhaps then that speaks to your interest in being part of an organization that is driving transformation and specifically then driving that chapter, which is woman focused. If we look at your own journey, are there aspects of your journey that you are able to link to some of the work that that you drive as the Women's Forum, where you felt that inclusion and diversity from a female gender perspective is still somewhat lagging behind when we take into context that Black broadly is still lagging behind?
I mean, certainly, long before I would interact with SAIBPP or even connect to the broader stakeholders in our industry on the subject of inclusion, gender inclusion, there were a lot of kind of evident experiences in our sector that I encountered in my own personal journey of having started a business and kind of ventured into that world of running a consulting practice. And I mean, it's really all quite well documented in the sense that the most obvious things are representation from, let's say, leadership perspective. And then you drill deeper into the question of access to market and opportunities, and then more deeply into, access to finance. So those things are certainly big barriers, I believe, that were always kind of there, whether officially or unofficially understood by myself in terms of what the stats are and what the actual anecdotal kind of information looks like on paper. Yeah. So certainly I think my journey and certainly the next person would mirror each other because, we see it even in the reporting.
So if we go into that, then from an ownership perspective, what does that landscape look like?
From an ownership perspective.
Yeah, whether you are a female business owner or female landlord, and yeah, really just ownership.
What does that? Yeah. And I think it's quite curious that one of the things that I was interested in and investigating early on in my journey with SAIBPP was I had inquired with one, I think it was the CEO at the time, to say, where can I go or what type of report or which institution looks into ownership specifically of, property or property related kind of information. If I want to work out how Black people are faring in the subject of ownership. And we debated it a lot because you find the information is not very direct, it's not very obvious to you what percentage of property or the business or, as it connects to the land outside of agricultural land, how much of that is in Black hands, is in Black female hands. And I think it's definitely still quite a curious question for us to figure out. And so we kind of use what's out there, in terms of maybe reviewing in the listed spaces, what is the reflection of ownership there. And I know the PSCC also, does their own work in terms of defining transformation in relation to the elements, and ownership is one of those. So I would still posit, that's not a very clear answer. There's no clear answer to that question, but there are remnants of ideas of, what Black ownership looks like in our sector.
And I guess then the leadership question also, the decision-making, capacity in big property businesses, both private sector and
public.
and to some extent public. Do we see, or do we have a little bit of comfort in terms of what that looks like?
So definitely I would say in terms of leadership, there is now very kind of good, strong, aggressive research that has been presented by the WPN, the Gender Diversity Report. And there, I mean, it looks at the REITs, which is again, the listed kind of environment. And so from there, I suppose we can already pick up, what the representation of executive level kind of performance is for females. And if we connect that maybe to a picture of where we would like to see ourselves, and I look at maybe the conversation of what the Commission of Gender Diversity looks at, which is, ultimately the goals should be such that the demographics of the country reflect, what you see in the work environment. So this means you should be able to see a 50-50 kind of representation of male and female in the workspace. But that subject and that kind of report alone, signifies that around, 22% of females are non-white, which I think if you look at the actual representation of that number, it sits at around 1 to 3%.
Sure.
So for management positions, senior positions, Black female representation is far from what we aspire for it to be. And I suppose then the picture is a little bit more improved in terms of the non-executive directorship representation. And I suppose even in the public sector, you start to see better numbers. Because I think there the number sits at about 39%. So still not the 50% that we aspire to see, but definitely a lot of work to do from, kind of the private listed environment.
There seems to be a question that is just insistent, that we are not able to show this improvement that we seek because there's either insufficient, an insufficient pool to source from.
Okay.
Or, we just don't know
where to find the talent.
Them. Yeah. I mean, how do we respond to that? What is your...
Yeah.
Do they exist?
I think that's certainly a discussion we've had quite extensively, even internally between ourselves as SAIBPP, to say we encounter a large number of, professionals and businesswomen in our sector who are, well, kind of experienced and highly skilled, but not within reach of those opportunities. So I think to solve this question, we have then, worked on compiling a database of women, Black fit women for any kind of position, well-skilled people. And I think the challenge I would put out to that question is reach out to us with those needs, reach out to us with that criteria. Let's, for the first time, kind of tackle it hands-on and see where we land. Because I'm not convinced that there is a lack of skill. And in fact, even where there is, I think, from a kind of responsive environment at a policy level, I mean, there are a lot of initiatives that endeavor to upskill people and specifically women in our sector. So we must start to interrogate those numbers closely and not maybe give up easily and say, we can't find these people. Yeah. And for an organized organization such as ourselves, I think we are, kind of putting up our hand and saying, speak to us. Let's see how we can resolve it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think if we are well-meaning in wanting to actually do something about it, we would not just be comfortable with we can't find them. We would then take it further to say, okay, what can we do?
Yeah.
To make sure that we create
Precisely.
a bigger pool.
Yeah. Because that in itself is a call to action for a transformative environment, the upskilling aspect of it, So certainly it's not enough to stop at the we can't find them kind of position.
Yeah.
There are answers out there, and we must just be intentional and be well-meaning, like you say, about, creating that inclusion.
And why is this diversity conversation an important one? So, I mean, if we literally just continue to do what we've always done, being comfortable with the fact that we are predominantly male and we are comfortable with that, and we just continue, on that trajectory, what do we stand to lose or gain by not being diverse and inclusive?
So, I mean, I suppose I will start by saying the conversation of gender diversity and inclusion is a global conversation. It speaks to a lot of things. So on that aspect alone, we lose out on our kind of edge and ability to compete at a global level and pitch ourselves where the rest of the world is pitching themselves, which is, starting to recognize rights for women.
Yeah.
Also, the need for diverse and open kind of inputs, because a one-dimensional world that is only, kind of productive and responsive to one type of gender or race, you lose out on the spectrum, the ability to invite, different thoughts, different inputs, different ways of doing things. And more than anything, I mean, I think in our country, we've already just talked the numbers. Half of this population is made up of women. So if you're driving a agenda of improving your economy, how do you do that with half the capacity, So certainly just by investing ourselves in the little motions of creating better, more responsive social kind of environments for women, we can answer just those two basic things, more productive economy and being able to play and pitch and respond at a global context.
Absolutely. And if we go back now to that policy, aspect, if we start to, to look there on the policy environment, the regulatory environment, are we firstly saying that there is, an environment that is nurturing, right, to cultivate this diversity and inclusion that we speak of? And are there any opportunities for women who are starting out or already are existing and struggling to find their way?
Sure. I suppose the straightforward answer for me is I would argue there are definitely strides in the right direction. And I look at, let's say, maybe the most topical kind of set of policy around the procurement bill. And how it seeks to, advocate for preferential procurement kind of preferences for groups of specific groups, like the set aside groups. That for me already speaks to, a government initiative or a government push for a level of inclusion, which is pretty important. And I also maybe look at, let's say, in the finance world, where we're starting to see a lot of prominence around, investment for impact. So that draws in a level of, preference for gender, which is quite important, because from a resource point of view, if you can drive that transformation and that inclusion from, access to finance, it's quite a big push. So I think if I look at the climate today and just those maybe two things, I certainly think that's in the right direction. And also using very strong levers, good kind of stakeholders in the conversation to advocate for that inclusion.
All right. And the opportunity then for women, women who are in business, where should they be looking? Where do they start for them to be able to identify and access, probably the opportunity that exists in growing and scaling their businesses?
Yeah. Also strong question, really kind of a good point, because I would argue it all kind of relies on the ease in which we transact the information. You're right. So if you are a stakeholder in the value chain and you are looking to invite women to participate in a particular kind of capacity, it's very important how you share that information, what platforms, and how accessible it becomes to a very wide spectrum of people, because otherwise it just becomes private information that very few can trade on. So I think once again, we even at SAIBPP level have talked about creating space for that kind of information sharing and creating a lot of freedom in how information is shared and accessed. And I think if that, as that kind of gains strength in itself, then it answers that question quite easily. People can know where to go to find specific kind of data or information on certain things. So, I think that is a very important part of it. But outside of that, I would then argue, it's kind of like it's the stripes you earn along the way.
Yeah.
Eventually, just by playing in the sector and interacting with people, you eventually figure out, where to go for what kind of to solve what a particular question. Yeah.
And whilst this, is probably quite broad in terms of the entire sector, broadly, but are there one or two spaces where you believe that there are, still dominant barriers, especially for females to enter or, wiggle their way around?
Sector-wide, I mean, I can't think of any part of the value chain where if I look that direction, I see a good split of representation, men and I mean, though I suppose we've talked more on the NED stuff. That's where we are seeing good shifts, from a leadership and a point of view, and then being able to influence decision making. But in my own personal experience, I would say, as we kind of aspire and try to embark on the developer route, there we see very, very little female representation, as opposed to, I suppose, contractors, where, that's starting to evolve and diversify quite well. So overall, I mean, I think there is lots and lots of room for women, whichever direction we look in this space, room to make, inroads and kind of space for ourselves. Yeah.
Sure. I imagine as a development consultant, the question of finance may not be a big one, but if you want to be a developer in your own right, then that is even a bigger right. It's a clear stumbling block.
Sure.
So access to finance. What is the ideal? What would you like to see?
Access to finance is actually for me a really kind of powerful position to create all these changes that we often speak of.
Yeah.
It's a very, in the ingredients of empowerment, I kind of see it as, a more prominent one, because it unlocks a lot of value, and ability to keep recycling and redoing in that value. And what I would like to see is a shift in maybe approach around how financiers or funders view risk, the risk assessment models. And also because that connects very largely to then the cost of finance. Yes. And then also the question of equity. I think, though, to that, I find there are already quite inventive and innovative responses and instrument from the sector, kind of answering the question of equity. And so I would say, while I don't see a scenario where you bring no skin in the game, but I do also question a scenario where, you bring in 30, 40. So the gearing there, I think it's quite important to always keep a transformative kind of perspective to how you plan those products. But I would definitely end off this part of the conversation by saying I am seeing in my own kind of growth path and experience in the sector a lot of changes, a lot of good responses to that question of equity.
Historically, we've had, whether it's a stereotype or not, this saying that women do not work well together. Women do not, get along. A woman's, worst enemy is another woman. From that perspective, are we seeing a collaborative, landscape from women? So, as a woman in business, how do we see that shape? Women actually working together and collaborating to work against these barriers.
Yes. So I can kind of think about this conversation and maybe cluster together a few words. So collaboration, networking, sponsorship, or mentorship, right? Because I think those things relate quite well to each other. And there is that kind of conversation that says women don't work well together. But I think there is a more constructive conversation where if we consider that what the power lies in your women who can, let's say, sponsor each other in the way that maybe we've seen in the male counterparts, and sponsor in the sense that kind of mentor you and take you through the reins of, the processes, the situations, the circumstances, all of it. So I think that's pretty important for women. And I also think more and more women are also kind of buying into that idea and thinking. Networking, I would argue, I mean, the boys and their boys club, they're well experienced and kind of well rehearsed in that kind of environment. And I suppose we women probably do it a bit differently.
Yeah.
So I would then probably say it's important for us to kind of do it the way we know how to do it. We may not necessarily be golfers or have the time in the day to go on a golf course like kind of the whole day, but there's other ways that we interact and congregate. So maybe the next step is about bringing in business into those interactions and congregations, because we speak quite well about our families, our kids, and we organize very well around those things. So it shouldn't be too different. But, I think as generations change and as also the evolution and education of things improve, we are definitely going to get into the habit of it. And so then the question of collaboration is where we are not doing it properly or aggressively.
Yeah.
There's definitely room to improve, and there's ways that we've ourselves identified. So I think now it's going to be in the motion of doing things in the way that we often speak about wanting to do them. Yeah. And also I think lastly, even in the conversation of inclusion, if people are not, let's say, we talk about the question of equity. We often say instead of one person trying to pursue a big kind of project where there's a big call for equity, maybe dividing it amongst a few of yourselves and then doing it that way is kind of a collaborative effort and unlocks then your ability to venture into the next thing on your own, which I agree with. The only thing is I feel like the share of the cake must also allow for us to want to share it, We can't be saying 1% representation, then, let's all collaborate and share this 1%, So there's different roles and different stakeholders that should answer to this conversation of collaboration. But I mean, we are not unable as humans or as women for that matter. Yeah.
And there's this feeling that as women, we tend to struggle to ask, right? So whilst, you're able to put in the work, but, to ask for your worth.
Yeah.
And maybe, tend to overthink it as opposed to, what our male counterparts would do. They will wake up, they think of an idea and they go for
Run with it, yeah.
And then women will tend to, mull over it over a period of time. What can we do differently, to actually gain that? Is it a confidence issue?
Yeah.
Is it
I mean, I love that question because on our on our Thursday sessions, we had one of our subcommittee members, Palisa, say, women need to have the audacity. Like, you need to just dare to take that half-baked idea and
run with it.
Run with it and solicit the input, solicit advice, and get it to a point where it has legs to stand. So I must say, when I heard that and the word itself, audacity, I would not easily connect it to myself personally. Even when I do things, I kind of feel like it has to be very convincing. It has to speak for itself. And I think that's just maybe the culture and the environment women have always walked into, having to arrive already on your way to perfection. There's not much room to make mistakes because the space itself already says, this is not your space. This is not your playground. So where you almost want to get there and not fail and not prove that narrative correct. But you know what? We are in the year 2024. That space is your space as a woman. Fail as often as you need to in order to learn and move forward. So I would argue that's our next kind of commitment to ourselves, to be more confident, more aware of the fact that we bring something to the table, we have something to offer. And I think this conversation is also very well connected to kind of the pay gap, If you consider that, I think the stats were sitting at something like 26 to 28% less. So you'd be doing the same thing that a male is doing and but you take it with a lot of appreciation, like, oh, thank you.
Like you are undeserving.
You know what I mean? So I think we are now in that era. If not just country, nationally or continentally, even on a global level, that we need to understand that women have a space here. We have the input and the mindset, the expertise. We are the table. So I would summarize that conversation by saying, we do need to kind of shift gears within ourselves and arrive with a lot more confidence and audacity.
Sure. And it goes back to, the elements that you spoke to, really doing the work on self. So whilst we are working on the environment in which we find ourselves, to change, we need to do the work in ourselves to actually, believe in what we bring and not still show up with the mentality of we need to prove ourselves, right? It's already done. We've proven ourselves. We just need to show up.
Yes. So absolutely. And I mean, I think of even, let's say, the term Black excellence.
Yeah.
We often use that and we kind of reserve it for a select few because you've really kind of got to treat it with the stature and the grandness of the word and its meaning to be excellent, and especially Black excellence. And I think that for us, it starts with like simple things, appreciating that race has nothing to do with how far you can go in life. Just appreciating even our Africanness, being African, being from this continent and of this continent. Then, it kind of ventures into different things, like understanding that there are no barriers to being female. There isn't anything that precludes you from doing, the things that you wish to do just because of gender. But what you've got to hold yourself to is arriving with that excellence, presenting yourself at your highest level and highest performance, because that is really the ingredient that is required for somebody to get the opportunity and then do the thing successfully.
Yeah. Actually, I think thinking about that word, excellence, we probably add on too much into it and we make it perfection when it actually is, just showing up at your best.
Yeah.
Excellence, doing the best, that you get, not perfection.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that there's no room for mistakes. It does not
growth,
mean that there's no room. Absolutely. But really just giving of yourself at your best. And I think if we understood that word in that context, would probably then have less struggles with believing that we are actually enough, because it's not perfection.
Yeah.
It really is your best.
Yeah. Just a good level of readiness and, putting some thought and action into it. Yeah.
All right. That was very, that was a good conversation. And I think now as we are about to wrap up, we have a question. So what we do is when you leave, you're going to have a question for the next guest. And the question for you is, if you were minister, there's this portfolio, right? Women, children, and people with disabilities. What would you do just for a month or even a year? What is the one thing
that I would
you
do
would,
in that ministry?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good question. Okay, so I think if I was in that ministry, what would I push for? I would possibly push for maybe a bigger piece of the pie. You know, because I kind of think if I look at the apportionment of, things as they relate to women, it's 30% of a collective group, youth. I'd kind of say, no, I want it to be 50% women. That's really what I want to see.
Yeah.
And push for that. That's then, I suppose, that answers the women component of it. As well as, I suppose, disabilities, even the stats around that, I would kind of still want to see a demographic representation of, as a way of fighting for the piece of the cake that I think that group of people deserve. Yeah.
Because I think we think the 30% is generous.
Yeah.
But
we are so
if
grateful.
You're actually looking at the number of women, because even in the disabled and the youth, there's still quite a huge number of the female, representation in there.
Yes.
So 50% minister.
So yeah, I know. I'd raise the number. But no, obviously I would want to just say, overall, I do think that the agenda of, inclusion is not kind of a one-day thing. It's a pretty long stretch that we've got to appreciate and acknowledge. But we've got to also put in the work daily, weekly, monthly, if we want to realize our goal. So I think we'll eventually get to 50%.
No, we must.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time. This was
for having me.
A very good and insightful conversation. There you have it. This is Property Market Moves. And if you have stumbled upon this recording and enjoyed the conversation, do share with your community, because our goal is to educate, is to inspire, it is to inform. As you walk along your property or business journey, and really just having some nuggets in terms of the type of investment that you need to put in on yourself as you show up in those spaces. So do like, share, subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. We truly appreciate the time that you take in to listen in, and we really do it not for ourselves, but to empower you, to inform you, to educate you, and be your friend along your journey. Bye.